My name is Summer Rodman. I'm the current president of the board for the Kerouac Project. And I'm just curious, how many people is this their first time here tonight? Oh, nice, good, good, okay. Well, again, welcome. Sorry. If you don't know what we do here, our primary program is we bring 4 writers a year to live here in the house. They get room and board paid for, and they're here for 3 months, working on a specific project that they talk about in their application period. And we read those the first part of the year. So Ryler is the last of this season, and then upcoming we'll have a new slate of writers to bring here. So a couple cool things I wanted to tell you about, now that you know more about us, is we recently were awarded a grant from the Gracia and Martin Anderson Foundation here in College Park. It's a $5,000 matching grant, so I know it's really exciting. And that money will be used to replace the roof, the beautiful metal roof on this house that makes it the sweet cottage that it is here in College Park. So if anybody wants to donate anything tonight, just know that it will be doubled. So please see me on that. We're pretty excited. We also have an event going on in New York City that is going to be September 3rd at Joe's Pub, and it is a evening of jazz and dramatic readings of Kerouac's work. It's really special. I'm going. If anybody wants to come, it's great. And if you know anybody in New York, and everybody does, please spread the word. The event is on our page. And on Facebook, we're Kerouac House, not Project, but please find us and watch for events there. So now I'd like to introduce Ryler. Ryler, I'm going to read his bio. Ryler Dustin grew up in Bellingham, 80 miles north of Seattle, Washington. He has since lived in Houston, Madrid, and Lincoln, and toured the U.S. performing spoken word. He has been a finalist in the Individual World Poetry Slam, and his poems appear in such journals as the New South and the Portland Review. His book, Heavy Lead Birdsong, is available from I forgot my glasses tonight. Right Bloody Press. He holds an MFA degree from the University of Houston and is a current PhD candidate at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, where he teaches college level and youth writing courses. And true to his Northwestern roots, still finds time to do yoga and go hiking. His interests include biology, sustainability, and how science complicates our need for spiritual awe. And I asked him a little bit about how science complicates the need for spiritual awe, because I was interested in that. And basically he says that the universe is being revealed so much through science, and it's changing our sense of awe and how that manifests in our lives. So it's a theme in much of his work, and it's also a theme in the novel that he's going to be reading to us from tonight, called The Horse Mender. And while a poet, he's been working on a novel, and that's what we're going to hear tonight. Please welcome Ryler.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who makes this possible. I could go on probably for the entire duration of this reading, expressing gratitude. This has just been an unreal experience, just amazing. But I will jump right into it, because I had a lot of difficulty in trying to choose excerpts from this novel as someone who discovered writing through spoken word and through poetry. This was a little challenging for me in some ways. So I'd just like to invite you, I guess, as I jump into this. I'm not going to give a whole lot of backstory, and I kind of like the idea of there being sort of mysterious edges around the things that I share with you. This is sort of a cobbled together journey that takes place across many pages in this novel, and the journey is sort of retrograde, so we're going into the past throughout the novel. And it's set actually in a future America that has been devastated through desertification and bad agriculture and things that I think are quite possible if we don't keep an eye on them. It begins during a sort of dust storm. So these storms are so large that they come over the Cascade Mountains from the middle of the continent and sweep into the Pacific Northwest, where the novel is set. And the protagonist has been raised by her grandfather, who is the horse mender in this town, who takes care of the animals in this sort of future devastated world. And they have a really valuable possession, which is what I'll share this opening part with. It concerns this sort of contraband possession. Inside the box, wrapped in brown cloth, was a book. The mosaic of photographs on the cover, a series of files, someone bending by a cow, an indecipherable blurry circle Wayland said was a cell, were darkened by flecks of black mold. Across them, thick, uncannily geometric letters read, "The Veterinary Field and Laboratory Manual, 12th Anniversary Edition." Cora took the book and candle to her chair and carefully turned the brittle pages to the ungulates section, then the chapter labeled Equine Health. She searched until she found the entry on thrush and mouthed it aloud as she read. The words written in the regular, oddly perfect Goner script were strange, but if Cora spoke them slowly to herself, as Wayland had taught her to, they were mostly recognizable. The notes in the margin, written shakily in several hands, were more useful. Some of the notes were used the same spelling as the Goner script. Others varied, still others were illegible even to Wayland. Scattered around the descriptions of herbs and treatment methods and recipes for poultices were stories. They described the circumstances of outbreaks, encounters that offered new veterinary knowledge, the ecology supporting important plants, the names by which an herb was known, even the myths surrounding an animal and the customs by which they were regarded. As space had grown scarce, the writing had become cramped and the notes more direct. Cora read the notes on thrush slowly, carefully, the origin of the disease, its virtual non-existence in dry climates, and especially the treatment described in shaky blue ink left by Wayland's mentor. Satisfied she had treated Miss Alba's mare correctly, she turned back to read about suturing and lice, though she'd sutured dozens of wounds, numbing them with hunter's bane, wrapping them with yarrow leaves. Cora went on turning the stiff pages, browsing. In the glow of the embers, the photographs of animals looked even stranger than usual. She'd been afraid of some of them as a child. The spiny, hard-eyed chameleon, the limbless snakes, the eerily drifting fish that were all frills and lace, gills hanging open like wounds. Others had made her laugh, like the impossibly bright bird being hand-fed by a human. Why someone would ever give food to such an animal except to fatten and eat it seemed unfathomable. They looked like nothing more than feather and bone, no fatter than the vicious crows that came down from the mountains during harvest season. People said the Goners had been so powerful that they had changed life itself, had sculpted the bodies of animals to suit their needs and whims, that hubris was what they had been punished for, why their cities had fallen, why all the animals they had loved became largely infertile or vanished altogether. Wayland didn't believe in such superstition and had raised Cora to have a skeptical mind, but not even he could discern the truth of what had happened. Cora glanced back at her grandfather. He was still asleep in his chair, breathing softly. She turned to the beginning of the book, a page just inside the cover that was blank now except for a row of handwritten names. The first few, James Halloway, Karen McCuddy, Thomas Rodriguez, were elegant and fluid, but the writing became sloppier as the list went on. After the fifth, the letters became especially shaky, uncertain, almost as bad as Cora's own handwriting when she practiced it in the dirt by the lean-to. Listening to the wind, she wondered if the silence had begun right then, in the tiny space between Jocelyn Diaz and Antonio Crane. The seventh name, Marlin, belonged to Wayland's mentor, the same blocky script of many of the notes about horses and hogs. Wayland's name was below it, the letters thick and wobbly, written when he was little older than Cora. The last name on the page was smoother, looping, beautiful but difficult to read. Cora ran her fingers over it, almost touching the delicate paper. Sylvia Rios, it said. Miss Alba's angry voice rose in her memory. You think I'm some kind of idiot? Sylvia vanished for good, been gone from the valley for 16 years. If Cora woke Wayland now, if she asked him why Sylvia had left, he would say what he always said, that she had met dangerous people, a dangerous man, and run off. That Wayland's pleas hadn't done a thing to dissuade his daughter. That she'd returned after she'd given birth to Cora and left again, abandoning them both. He'd say nothing Cora hadn't heard before, nothing that might explain Sylvia's betrayal. Pressing him about it was one of the few things that made him angry. Cora had once been frustrated by her grandfather's silence. She'd imagined her mother as a salvager, not bent by green fever like most, but bold and strong, plumbing secrets from the ruins of the drowned coast. Or she daydreamed about her caring for horses in a caravan crossing the dry lands, or living in the Yellow Mountains. Salvagers and wanderers told tall tales about the forests there, about the evil, beautiful spirits of women, or deadly flashing lights, or bandits and half-human cannibals. Cora had liked to imagine her mother living there in secret, a wise woman among the savages and haunted trees. But those were children's stories, and Cora came to understand her grandfather's anger as the years went by, to understand the desperate hunger of the world, how difficult it was for an aging man and a young girl to fend for themselves, how total their abandonment had been. Wayland was the one who had loved her. Her mother was only a myth, another long-vanished creature inside the book. Sylvia Rios was almost the last of many things, the last horse mender, until her abandoned father trained her abandoned daughter, the last of the Whitestones, except for those few who persisted afterward, their dreams in tatters, the last traveler, aside from two, who ever sought out the bandits of the Stillwater and lived. At 20 years old, she knew much about the rest of the continent, more than most at least, because she understood intuitively where knowledge came from, which was rumors and lies. In a lie, there was always part of the truth, and that truth was more accessible the better you became at reading a person. The frightened exaggerated, while the truly terrified spoke only literally. The poor spouted the half-truths they depended on for hope, which were often shaped by the lies the powerful had fed them. If you could understand a horse, you could understand a person, so long as you kept them talking long enough to learn the dialect of their face and body. Sylvia made a point to keep people talking. She did this in the back of Fellwater Tavern and on the streets during harvest, with timid women like Elra who needed to hear about the ways you were uncertain in order to grow certain of what they themselves knew, with hard women who did not like you unless they felt you had earned it, with men like Daggis who were honest and observant and gossiped only reluctantly, with men like John Quervis who were dull and noticed little but spoke as if their lives depended on it, especially to impress a woman. Sometimes you had to let men like that talk until they ran out of ways to exaggerate and resorted at last to the mundane, to the actually useful. They were like the pump in the dying settlement 2 days south of the valley. You had to pump it 12 times before the water finally ran clean. A horse mender, a truly gifted one, could go anywhere she wanted. No one had told Sylvia this, but she had learned it from false promises. Travelers were especially valuable because they were all the more so because they were lonely. They actually wanted you to know them and exaggerated less the more interested you seemed in what they were already saying. It was a traveler, an especially lonely one, who first spoke to her about the secret. The traveler was a smuggler. That's why he'd bivouacked so far from the cross. And there was only one thing he could have been smuggling. That goat he had was pregnant. Sylvia was sure of it. A pregnant animal was contraband, more valuable even than salvage or guns. Perhaps the New Republic's encroachment in the area had forced him to leave his land. But why was he taking the goat here, risking discovery? What did he hope to gain? And why was he seeking her father? Wayland wouldn't have lied to her, Sylvia was certain of this, and smuggling was the last thing in the world he'd have been involved with. He calculated every choice to minimize the risk they would face. His caution, his over-brimming care for her, seemed almost stifling at times. The way he still called her windflower after the arnica she'd supposedly picked as a baby while he and her mother had gathered herbs nearby in the foothills. She'd almost eaten the flower, which would have killed her. Sometimes she thought this name was not a reference to the flower's beauty, as he said, but to the frailty it symbolized, the delicacy of one small heartbeat, how close Sylvia was at any moment to doing the wrong thing, the thing which would whisk her from the world. And yet Sylvia had been only 8 when her mother, Gillian, daughter of Marlin, had died from green fever, though she'd never set foot near the toxins of the drowned coast. Sylvia had decided without realizing it that there was no defense against frailty. If anything at all could be done, it was to heal things, not to try to protect them. And healing depended on knowledge, on sight, on gathering and combining and distilling as much of it as possible. She thought of the traveler and of the cataract-fighting flower he needed for his goat, celandine. She loved the name, how it moved through the mouth, celandine, celandine. It was a word that could teach you to kiss. The name the man had used for it, swallow's wort, was familiar to her also. It was scribbled below celandine inside the manual. She hadn't known that name was from the uplands, though. This made sense, given the story she'd heard about how crows used the flower to open the eyes of their young. A swallow was another type of bird, she knew, much rarer, and the story about crows and their young must have also been told about swallows. So, the man knew something about plants, and he had a fertile animal, at least the one, if not more. That was why he hadn't wanted Sylvia to examine any beside his mare. But why invite her anywhere near them? What information had he gained from risking his own exposure? He had been testing her, her knowledge and skill. He was looking for a horse mender, someone perhaps to help care for the valuable animals. Celandine, swallow's wort, arnica, windflower. There were often many names for the same thing. Sylvia did not yet know what love was. She knew only the jeers of farm boys, the false bravado of soldiers traveling in packs, the leers of old men. Sometimes she thought she craved love. She had felt the thrill of attraction, though never toward one man for long. But most often she considered what she felt, its ache and pressure, to be just another aspect of her thirst for the world beyond the valley. As a girl, she had trained herself to sense the moon's phases. She had tested this once, to her father's amusement, by refusing to go outside after dark for over a month, long enough to disorient her sense of the lunar calendar. She had an unusual capacity for longing. There were good men at the cross, farmers who worked hard, soldiers who were not mean like the others but tried to keep peace. Something was always missing. If it can be said simply why Sylvia had not been in love, it was this. She had not yet found that form of courage which most moved her. So she set love aside, and because she had never been in love, she believed this to be her own decision. This mistake was an extension of a lonely, prideful quality, the sense that she was not like other people. So it was only on the downslope of love that she looked around and noticed, for the first time, herself standing right there among them, among everyone who has lived long enough to feel the earth pulled gently, grain by grain, away from their feet, receding, to realize that all that happens when one falls in love is that one stops moving. It is the eternal spinning away of the world itself that one notices then, looking at the thing that has made one stop. He was not an affable man, but he was boyish and kind, prone to spells of long thought, endlessly patient with the animals in his charge. His cunning came from an unfamiliar place. He was not smart like her in the usual sense, but he had his own intuitive gifts. He could not have trained himself to feel the phases of the moon, and at times he even struggled to orient himself in time or space. But he had a way of noticing things that Sylvia did not. He did it without noticing. While Sylvia would pick out half a dozen physical details of someone they met, weighing them, Corvin would remember only the arch of an eyebrow, the flutter of a hand, which told everything. She wrote biographies. His impressions came most often in similes. "You're like this map," he would say. What she thought but did not say was that he was like the priceless compass by which they oriented it, sensitive, delicate, unfailing. And he did have courage. In the 2 or 3 times when they were in mortal danger, and in the quiet, more dangerous moments when they were simply cold and hungry, huddled by the animals for warmth beneath the raw stars, it would reveal itself in him like a daylight candle that had always been burning. Corvin seemed to feel no difficulty in sharing this courage, seemed not to even believe it was his. He felt it from some invisible source, something far beyond that guided him, not something inside that pushed. For 2 years, Corvin had worked for the Whitestones, an order of doctors and veterinarians, midwives and medics, pharmacists and seers. The pursuit of science, denied the conditions and ideals upon which exact inquiry depends, clung here and there to life. In small enclaves, in patois and vestiges of Latin, in paranoid networks ferrying pipettes and prodigies who spoke no common language, science, such as it was, remained braced in all places to be co-opted by the world's desperate violence. What little progress had been made in such instances was immediately stripped, recast, repurposed for killing. Often, like unearthed metal forged into bullets, knowledge was soon buried again. Corvin did not know where the Whitestones had originated. He had been to only one haven, far in the north. He had only one contact, Juliet, a breeder who had managed to cultivate a small, fertile population of near-extinct hounds called Afghans. Corvin had been born an uplander himself and could speak the woman's northern dialect. He knew of no other agents, no other strongholds. It was a dangerous time. Corvin and 3 others had been recruited to establish more links in the network. Way stations where precious fertile animals could deliver their young and rest before they were funneled on to Juliet, where they would be studied. He had no idea whether they would be part of a single chain or a series of tributaries. His mission was to find a safe place in the West, in New Republic territory, and a skillful caregiver to tend to the animals. For 2 months, he and Sylvia lived off and on outside the cross, wandering, gleaning information, searching for a safe place to settle with the animals. They'd grown increasingly desperate. The New Republic's presence was expanding, concentrating bandits and dangerous renegades in the few wild places that remained. Sylvia said goodbye to her father in the last days of the harvest, the streets full but tired now, hungover, wilting in the steam of sunlit puddles. Corvin leaned by the well, his hat down, just within earshot of the horsemender's home. He liked Wayland immediately because of the way he spoke to his daughter on their doorstep. A few brief, worried phrases, a term of affection, a long silence. It was enough to know him by. There was something attentive about him, like Sylvia, but without that restless, brilliant, almost blinding edge. The door closed. Corvin wanted to knock, to introduce himself, as was the custom in the uplands and probably everywhere when you are deeply in love with someone's child. But that would have exposed the aging man and Sylvia's home to risk. There were rules among the Whitestones, and good reasons for them. And anyway, Sylvia's father would not have understood. How could he? So Corvin took out a gale leaf to smoke and thought, this is what my life is now. He then understood for the first time the choice he had made when he joined the Whitestones, when he'd given up everything in the hopes of doing something that mattered. It was a choice made not only for himself, but for all who would ever love him. He did not yet know that Sylvia was pregnant. She understood much more about herbs than him, and had explained the use of pennyroyal. But even the strongest herbs are fallible at times. Much later, Sylvia, who as a girl had believed she could feel the phases of the moon, would say that she knew something inside of her was changing, that this is why she wanted to get the dangerous job over with, to find a safe place for them to settle. But whatever she may have suspected, she was thinking only one thing on that day when they parted ways, and she went into the mountains to find the bandits. As they left the cross separately and rendezvoused, as they took the Fool's Road and then turned north to face the forest's flickering edge, it was, "I hope we see each other again." Corvin watched her go. She grinned back at him, leading the fertile sheep up through the brush. She was a small but not a delicate woman, and she stomped the brush down fiercely so that the sheep could pass. In the moment she faced forward again, her eyes grew serious. Windflower, he thought, because that is what her father had called her. Thank you, guys.
Kerouac House tradition, after the reading, we have a Q&A session, so this is your chance to ask Ryler whatever you would like.
Sweet. I go for it. Okay. Yes, hello.
What was the second section you said about being guided from the outside or pushed from the inside?
What was the section?
Yeah, what did you say?
I think I said that he was guided by something far off that pulled rather than something inside that pushed.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Beautiful.
Can you talk a little bit about your process, how you go about writing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's an ongoing exploration of how to do it, you know, and in the sense that I think writing is challenging partly because you have to constantly sort of relearn it in the sense that you can't be doing something that's been done before, even by yourself, because you have to be honest to how you feel in that moment. Or in the case of a novel, which has been an adjustment from poetry, in the case of what seems honest to the characters and to the flow of the narrative. I think my process has actually evolved quite a bit as a result of being here. Just this insane gift of having just like endless fields of time. And one thing I've learned is that it is actually more time effective to wait and let yourself think about your work, or even just get in touch with the feeling of it. As opposed to, you know, both of my parents have a really strong work ethic, and I sort of was raised to like work hard and like just like hit it hard, you know, and they're like, okay, if you want to be a writer, that seems, you know, probably impossible, but, you know, work really hard at it every day and you can do it. And so that was kind of my initial approach, but it's actually better to like just like lay in your bed for like an hour and a half and like think about it, or like go for a walk around the block, you know, and until you find that thing that's like, oh, this is what I actually care about. So often in trying to write this novel, I found myself like trying to move pieces on a chessboard or like push the narrative forward, because I kind of know the overall things that need to happen in the storyline. But that writing is never good. You know, it never ended, at least for me, it never ended up being good. So what I had to do was think about, what do I actually feel interested in writing about? Like, what do I want to write about that seems fun or seems interesting? And so sometimes I would come at a chapter by like describing the history of the building, and then the characters walk into the building, you know, because I don't want to just start with the characters walking into the building. For some reason, you know, that might seem boring to me. So honoring that has been a huge paradigm shift for me, you know, and realizing that if you are not interested in what you're writing when you're writing it, then your reader is not going to be interested. It doesn't matter how skillful you are, how many writing workshops you've taken, how awesome the overall story is. And so that's that delicate balance, because you have to be kind of discovering something as you write. But on the other hand, as many of us know, if you just write through something, it can fall apart because you don't realize, you know, that there's incongruities or something in the narrative. So you have that balance. And so I guess I don't know how to perfectly achieve that, but I know that that's important now, and that has been a kind of recent evolution, I think, in my process, is like letting myself chill out for a while and be like, what would actually be interesting to write about, rather than what needs to happen in the narrative, you know? So, but that's speaking as primarily a poet, so maybe that's, like, I don't know, maybe experienced fiction writers would say something different.
I think I was just totally lost in your work. I mean, I think in a good way. I think it was your detail was amazing. We came to know the characters in a very quick, you know, short amount of time, and believed the setting. It was really wonderful.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that actually was written only a few weeks ago. You know, pretty late in my time here, and I just hit such a good stride with it for some reason. Because Sylvia had been a ghost in that narrative for you know, maybe like 150, 200 pages before we get to that. Because the protagonist, Cora, who's the girl in the beginning looking in the book, she's the one we follow most of the time, and she has these questions about why her mother abandoned her and what her mother was like, and there's kind of like scraps of her mother in the world, but we never really, oh, you can just come through, yeah. So that a lot of that was like discovering that character, and I think that's why it's good writing. You know, is that I didn't have her completely charted out. I was like okay, like what kind of woman is this? I'm just kind of free writing about it. And then sometimes you do that and it's terrible, and you're just like, okay, you try again. You know. So, thank you. Any other questions, ideas? Yes.
So your process in writing poetry is totally different, is it?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I'm not sure. It's definitely not totally different. The hard part with poetry is that you have to find something to write about, you know, over and over. And that thing could be just a scrap of language, it could be an image, it could be an idea, it could be anything. But I think the process is pretty similar. But I think with this, I'm learning to move this closer to poetry. You know, and that's kind of what I mean by that. What's interesting to me right now. You know, one of my favorite chapters in here, I haven't gotten any feedback on it, like most of this yet. So maybe I'm wrong. Sometimes I'm completely wrong about what I think is good and what's not good. But one of my favorites to write was this. It was like in the middle of a chase scene, sort of. And there's a chapter break at this kind of dramatic moment where Cora ends up having to flee this town because she gets kind of involved in the choices her mother had made. They kind of come back to haunt her. And then the next chapter, I was like just going to pick up the chase scene, but I kept trying and it didn't feel alive, it didn't feel interesting. So I ended up talking about the ecology between this tree and this symbiotic flower that she had learned about. And sort of telling the story of her grandfather learning about how to identify the flower that is useful herb in veterinary care. And then like her seeing the flower and thinking of the myth that he had been told by his mentor, but she thinks of it as the way he told it to her, which is a little different. And then she kind of has her own misinterpretation of it. So it like starts with this myth and then it ends up with her having this kind of warped version of it in her thoughts as she sees this flower and is sort of like hiding behind this tree. So to me that was super fun, and it was like exciting, you know, and that felt like writing poetry. So maybe that's good. Maybe that's, you know, they aren't as different as I had often thought, I guess. So
Thank you.
yeah. Denise.
I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of lens with the love narrative. I thought that was really powerful, dumbfounding, actually, and using that as a way to do character development, I thought was really, it was similar to like your poetry that I've experienced, I have to say, but far more in depth. And I wonder if you do that that juxtaposition and threading in building other people in the book, and or other important plot points in the narrative.
Yeah, you know, I don't as much. You know, I think what I read was where I'm doing that the most.
It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, what's funny about it too is that we are often brought up, like those of us in creative writing classes, with the maxim "show, don't tell," and that was really ingrained in me. And so early on, and throughout the novel, I like, if I describe, you know, a room, it's like as the character is setting something on the table and then like walking to the, you know, like, so everything is embedded in action often.
Right.
And what I began to learn around like page 200 of it, which is about where that happens, was that you can actually just tell people things. Like you can just tell them what a character's like she believed this and this is how she thought. And that was incredibly freeing. I mean, and that's what opened all of that up, was like, oh, I don't have to show her in interactions with people and how she thinks of a certain person while she's trying to get information from them. I can just like tell you how it works. So I don't have to show them in love for multiple scenes to get it. I can just tell you, like, this is how they experience love. And so, you know, for those of you who are writers, I would encourage you to just like try just like telling people what, and that's some feedback I got. You know? So, and I got this from graduate students in Lincoln, where I'm going to school for poetry, in a fiction workshop where I was like the odd man out as a poet. I was like completely wide-eyed, had no idea what I was doing, and at some point they were like, Ryler, the story's really good, but you need to just like tell us what's going on sometimes. Just tell us, you know, rather than feeling like you have to like perfectly hint at it so that like an attentive reader will pick up the clue and realize like.
Well, you use so much poetic device in your work. Like, yeah. Thanks to anyone who set up.
Thank you. No, just keep it coming. But yeah, I mean, and I think that freedom opened me up to use those, you know. So yeah, just tell us things. Other questions or thoughts or ideas? I mean, yeah, some.
I guess where do you go from here, post Kerouac residency?
Well, it's going to be, you know, speaking of juxtaposition, it's going to be an intense juxtaposition because I'm going back to Lincoln for the last year of my PhD. I'll be all but dissertation after this year. So I have to take these comprehensive exams on literature, and I'll be teaching a couple of classes, and I think I'm just going to be insanely busy. So you know, I'm excited about a lot of that, but I'm bracing for the stark change from like waking up at like, you know, 11. You know, as is part of my process, laying in bed for an hour and a half. I sound so lazy. Maybe it's just I'm just justifying my lifestyle. But you know, it's going to be like, I'm just going to be working hard. But I think being here has actually given me a really good foothold in this, and such a strong foothold that I can keep it going. You know, and I think it's hard to start a big project like this when you're really busy, because you have to be in that world, you know, you have to immerse yourself in it, and I have a very hard time multitasking, you know? Like I get an email on my phone, it's like, I have to do this training protocol thing, or schedule a meeting sometime, and it just like totally derails me. It's hard for me to like quickly switch back and forth. So I think I have a good foothold now. I'll be in Lincoln, I'll be teaching a freshman composition class, and reading tons of books and getting ready for this exam. And then in May, after this year, I'm doing another residency. It'll be the second residency I've ever done after this one. And this will be in a cabin out in the forest for a year. So it will be, again, like intense, boom, no internet, I'm really excited about it. Like,
wild.
my friend Denise is freaking out because she could like.
I can't imagine not having internet for a year.
She came to visit and it's like, I'm not going to use internet this whole time. And it's like 10 days. And like 3 hours in, you're like, this is really hard, Ryler. Other questions? Or I don't know what the timeline is. Yeah.
So, did you have any expectations of Orlando or this whole area when you were coming here, and how did those meld with what you experienced?
I definitely had expectations. I thought that it would be really conservative. I honestly was not excited about the place itself. I was excited about the house and the legacy of the house and the time to work. But I imagined it being just theme parks and like retirement homes. And it's amazing. I mean, there's so much going on here. Like, I feel like I could have just partied and gone to poetry readings the entire time, and I never would have been bored at all. Like, I wouldn't have written anything either, of course. But I'm just blown away by how much culture is here, how much art and support, and you know, the terrible tragedy at Pulse happened when I was here, and I wasn't really going out much at the time. I wasn't really experiencing that as someone who had been out in, you know, downtown or around Orlando. But just seeing how the city responded to that was unbelievable. I mean, the amount of support was just insane. So that was, you know, that was really terrible. But I guess one, you know, upside as a visitor was that I got to really see the fabric of the city just like rise to the fore, I think. So I really like it. I like Orlando a lot. I mean, yes, I love it. I won't say more than Lincoln, but Lincoln. Yeah.
How are you balancing world building, the world of the novel, and the actual narrative? Because the world you're creating is so specific, and sometimes I've read speculative fiction where that balance is very, very off. How are you balancing that? Like telling this amazing, get lost story, but also saying this is the world we're living in, or our people are living in.
Wow, great question. Part of that is retroactive. So I've gone back, especially to the first chapter, really, to like tweak the setting a little bit. You know, the first time Cora, you know, looks out from the road and sees the valley that we start the novel in. Changing the trees there, changing maybe the time of year a little bit, and things like that to kind of, so, you know, my advice would be, if I were going to give myself advice in the past, would be to just kind of write forward, and then you can go back and you can change things. And there's a lot about this world that is changed ecologically. You know, plants are changed because there's so much UV radiation, and things have adapted to these dust storms and to the intense radiation, the sunlight. Obviously, you know, the coast is toxic because of nuclear reactors and things having been degraded and melted down after society kind of collapses. So there's a lot of change, but you know, some of it I went back and was able to add that in. But I think that's a really important balance. I mean, one of my favorite, I don't know if I'd call him a speculative author even, but he's science fiction. His name is M. John Harrison, and he wrote a book called Light that is really interesting, really weird, really poetic. And he wrote another book called The Pastel City that is kind of a post-apocalyptic sort of wasteland story. And he said that world building is like the stupidest and most useless thing you can ever do in sci-fi. This is a super controversial statement, of course, because, you know, like Lord of the Rings, or, you know, you could list so many amazing fantasy and sci-fi books that do that. But his take is like the extreme end of like, he'll just write poetry. You know, he'll just start one sentence after the next writing like what comes to mind about this place he wants to just create, and he doesn't worry about building a world, you know. But I think for me the balance is not quite that far, but closer to that maybe than some, like, you know, some classic sci-fi books. So I think in this draft even it's not perfect yet. I think there are some parts earlier on I need to change, but I think retroactively is a good way to do that. I also think you can build the world ahead of time and go into it. For me, that I don't think that hampered any world building I did. Didn't hamper the exploration of it. So if you're working on a speculative book or something and you have a lot of world building, I mean, I don't think that's wasted. But I think one should be flexible about it. And sometimes you might realize for the poetry of the story that a certain part doesn't seem right or doesn't ring true. And then now and then I'll realize something that had been a baseline assumption for the story doesn't make any sense, and that's been really troubling. But I've gone back and torn things out and rewritten things. But that's a bummer. But I guess it just happens sometimes. Other questions? Yes, tell me, remind me your name again. I'm sorry, it's
Kimberly.
Kimberly, right? Okay.
I want to say that I thought it was really cool that you balanced, you had these incredible descriptions. Like probably my favorite part is when you describe the lines on the inside cover of the book with the names, and then between the one name and the other, like that, and then you just said when the silence happened. Mm-hmm. And I love that you slipped in these things: the silence, the green sickness, and your incredible detail was I felt very well balanced with your not needing to explain everything. Your world building was very seamlessly, I felt, put in there, and you gradually explain things, not like you would be telling somebody, but like you were experiencing it with your characters. Mm-hmm. So I thought you did a really great job with that, especially with how you connected the white stones was mentioned in the beginning, and then was explained by Sylvia. And then the same thing with the green sickness and how you tie that in with the water. Like there were things that popped into my brain, but then you answered them seamlessly without me going, oh, so that's what that was. So you did a really great job.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, that's just kind of a balancing act. I was talking with Denise last night we were talking about metaphor or who was
we talked about so many things.
We talked about a lot. Yeah, we got into it. But I was talking about, and also during the interview yesterday for the Drunken Odyssey, I was talking about the art of curling, like the ice sport. And that's one of my favorite metaphors for writing, because I think you want to get as close as you can to this line, where someone understands something but you don't have to explain it. And that's even with poetry, with an image, with a metaphor. If you can say, I wish you could just like come up with or remember a beautiful image. But some of like Pablo Neruda's images, for example, they don't really make sense, but you feel what they mean. Mm-hmm. And I think he's good at getting so close to that line that it's like maximum points. But if you go a little over, then you don't get any points. It like drops to 0. So it's the art of like trying to get as close as you can to that line, I think. And sometimes with stuff like the silence or the green fever, you can just kind of try it, and then if you let it breathe for a while, you can come back, reread it, and you'll know if it's something you need to explain. Yeah, but thank you. I'm glad that's working out. That's been a concern of mine. So, other questions, ideas? Okay, yeah.
What was your motivation in trying to change your genre to writing a novel from writing? Why did you choose to do that?
Wow, yeah. Well, initially, I started the ideas for this novel about 4 years ago. So it's been in the works for a while. And that was because my niece is really into horses, and I wanted to tell her some kind of story. I just wanted to tell her a story, and also because I'd seen documentaries and stuff about Monsanto, and I feel very concerned about agriculture. And I think in post-apocalyptic writing, that's usually overshadowed by nuclear war and things that are, or like a mysterious flu outbreak. I'm reading Station 11 right now, which is a beautiful book, but I don't think that book is beautiful at all because of the actual cause of the apocalypse. It could be anything in that book. And what I like about what I really set out to do with this was to call attention to the way that we treat the planet in terms of farming and how unsustainable it is and how just insane it is. And so I've really resisted the urge to have like nuclear war having happened in this, you know? And so that was part of my motive, was reading about Monsanto and seeing some documentaries about the way that they, treat farmers in other parts of the world, especially like in Mexico or in Central America, and just the corporate greed that fuels it. And so I kind of wanted to write a story that was addressing that, I guess. And then also just in terms of my own practice, I wanted to be able to work really hard at something for a long amount of time, which sounds crazy. I mean, it is crazy. It takes so much time to write. Many of you know, some of you maybe don't, or you're just starting to learn that, but like 6 pages a day is a good number for me, and that's writing all day. So it takes a really long time. So it is a little insane, I think, to try to write a novel, but it's nice because you get up in the morning and you have something to work at. You have a problem to kind of like try to unravel, some writerly problem you've hit, or some way you're trying to figure out an angle for something. So to me, that's really satisfying. In a way that poetry, while I love it, at times it's like, okay, I wrote poetry for like 2 hours today and I have no more like thoughts or feelings. I'm just done, So I'll just watch Netflix, And so it's nice to be like, okay, well, I'm here at this house and I can use all of this time with something, So those, I guess, are the 3 motives.
Thank you, Ryler.
Yeah, thank you guys.